So we're going to pick up on some of the golden threads or the golden hyphae that have been emerging throughout the course of today, and we're going to start to weave them together. So this session is called Competitive Collaboration and the Exploration Mindset. So we're focusing on the collective strength that we find in collaborating with each other. And sometimes that means actually collaborating with our direct competitors who challenge us to be a better version of ourselves. Another thread that I want to pick up on is the drive that we channel in our adventures, and it also drives us into uncertain places that we must explore when we are seeking to protect our trails and wild spaces. That same mindset that makes us uncomfortable with uncertainty in the outdoors makes us uncomfortable with uncertainty when perhaps we don't have all of the data or all of the answers, but we still want to drive ourselves forward. So, like we heard before, this is about taking small steps, not letting perfect be the enemy of achieving something, and taking this momentum forwards together. So, thank you very much to our fantastic panel members, some of whom have stepped in at the last minute, so thank you. And they're all involved in different alliances and collaborations that have worked really well, and we're really excited to hear them share some of their experiences. So, without further ado, we have Scott, who has come from the European Outdoor Group. Now, none of you may have heard of the European Outdoor Group, and that's kind of deliberate, but Scott is a program manager there for the Single-Use Plastics Project and leads a working group of 35 different outdoor companies looking to reduce and better manage the use of single-use plastics. We've got Jez, who is familiar to some of you here. He's a media and PR specialist at Trek UK, and when Dom first came to him with a crackpot idea, Jez was willing enough to say yes. And I think this is a really nice example of a brand supporting a bottom-up community initiative that doesn't have any direct outcome and no obvious way at how it would return investment for that brand. And I think it's an example that we need more of in our world. Rachel Crew-Smith is an outdoor professional, as well as mountain biking. She can be found scaling walls, climbing and mountaineering. And as well as her personal work, she's part of a pioneering climbing festival called the Women's Trad Fest, which some of you might have heard of. So if you thought mountain biking was scary, imagine climbing up a rock wall with nothing to protect you except for the gear that you place yourself. And so like mountain biking, the climbing world has got a lot of challenges in that you either need somebody to take you under their wing or a lot of money to pay somebody who's qualified to coach you. So there's a lot that we can learn from that world. And our last minute addition is the fantastic Harry Brook from Patagonia. He coordinates the 1% for the Planet commitment for Patagonia in the UK and Ireland. And they've got a long history of supporting grassroots environmental groups, and they continue to support groups working to protect our playgrounds and wild spaces. So thank you so much to all of you. Thank you to all of you, who I'm sure will supply excellent questions. And over to you guys.
You wanted us to just give a quick intro? I think you did a great job, but okay. I'm Scott. I manage the Single-Use Plastics Project, have since 2018. If you haven't heard of it, that's good. We've been very particular about not getting this out because it's a group of outdoor brands, of which I've got at least one represented here. So 2018, it was actually Ryan Gellert and a few other great outdoor brands, about 17 originally. We're now up to about 45. We're not really trying to grow too aggressively, but it's a group of outdoor organizations that knew that they had an issue with single-use plastics. They wanted to see, well, what can we do about it from our end? The reason why you might not have heard about it is, and by design, is because we noticed that in this space there's a lot of finger pointing. We've already discussed this, I think, today, around whose fault is what. And I think that what we wanted to pursue and what we wanted to reflect on is what we could do, irrespective or regardless of, I'm getting a little echo here. Regardless of, is there anything I need to? We wanted to look at what we could do, regardless of if there was any input from governments or any input from some of the consumers. And so we ultimately just decided, let's just plot on with our own little work. And now we've got some really great stuff. There's a lot you can read and learn about it, and I'm not going to go and cover it in depth. But what I did think was maybe meaningful for this specific occasion was to say this group of people who are traditionally competitors, who traditionally compete for market share, who recognized that this was an issue that they deemed was pre-competitive, something that transcends or goes above all of us. And it was also something that even when somebody came up with a really great, neat idea, There was an example of a brand who worked so hard to remove plastic from many of their products, came to their warehouses and their facilities, and then the retailers that they were shipping them onto required them to put plastic back around it. So they'd done all this work, and it's reflective of the fact and the reality that it's a complicated system, it's a complicated ecosystem, it's a complicated supply chain. And if we didn't work together, we weren't really going to make any progress. So hopefully we have a couple of learns that we can bring to this discussion today.
Thank you. Thanks. Yeah, so I'm Jez from Trek UK. I think it was 2018, Dom, was it? Yeah, so I'd had a crackpot came to me with a crackpot idea at Fort William. I instantly got it. My biggest challenge was convincing my bosses what that idea was and how to make it work. Thankfully, Dom then went on travels for 6 months, so it gave me 6 months to get that idea right in my head and sell it. But that ethos of community, access, and behavioural change, well, bike's an intrinsic part of that. So that was my sell to my superiors, and they just ran with it. They said, yeah, you're in it, commit to it. Don't just do it as a one-off, do it for the long run. And now it's become an integral part of how the UK office works. And the big thing for me now is just spreading the word. I want people on board. So I don't care who you're from. As long as your heart's in it and you want to be part of it, come on board. So yeah, that's my main goal today is just come and say hello. And if you want to do things, please, yeah, tap me up, really. Thank you.
I think I'm here maybe as the sort of individual grassroots instructor in the room. I don't know Don that well. I've only met him a couple of times, but I chewed his ear off about all sorts of things around the people that I work with. If I take someone mountain biking, am I actually doing a disservice to the trails by introducing more people to the trails? And the way that I came to terms with that is if I work with 6 people, I can give 6 people my message of how they can look after the environment that they're in. And I work in mountaineering as well as in mountain biking. The Women's Trad Fest, their 3 core aims are sustainability, inclusivity, and well-being. And I think that they really nail those 3 gender items perfectly. And when Dom said on Saturday, has anyone been to a festival where they've got the recycling right? I felt very proud to stick my hand up and say, yeah, we've got it right. So you can read all about it on the internet. They've got an amazing media team that you can see all about their core aims and how that is filtering down into mountaineering and climbing.
Thank you, everyone. Ironically, the reason that I came here to the Trashfield Trails Summit and to attend the weekend was actually to listen, which now I've got a microphone in my hand sounds ridiculous. And the reason I came to listen is because as Patagonia, we can talk about success stories, we can talk about what has happened through the mobilization of community over the last 50 years that we've been in business and we've sought to support, but we are not the experts. We are there as a business at the end of the day, and whilst we have an obligation, a responsibility to support the communities and the playgrounds that we operate in and we make gear to work with, we're not the experts in what those playgrounds actually are. So I guess what I'd say to everyone here who's attended over the summit, who's attended over the weekend, is thank you for the work that you are doing, and thank you for sharing that work as a community and providing opportunity for businesses, because that's who I am, that's what I represent today, to come in and learn where we can truly support and what the issues are on the ground, because it'd be so easy to look at this from a zoomed out perspective and decide what we would like to dictate the pace of this community is and put our stamp upon that and drive it with a corporate agenda. And that is not how movements are built. If you use the Margaret Mead quote about a collective of citizens creating meaningful change, there's no subclause in there that's about a corporate partnership. It's all about grassroots movement on the ground. So, yeah, everything that Trash Free Trails represents to me is a gateway. It's a gateway to much more meaningful and wider activism that creates systemic change, that we start to not look at the plastic bottle and look at the labeling on it and putting the onus on the individual to dispose of it responsibly, but we zoom all the way back out and look at the factors affecting that individual, from the fact that they're consuming sugary drinks and the bottle's made from fossil fuels and they're the most adversely affected by the climate crisis. I'm rambling, but what I'm trying to say is that what is built here, what's founded here, is what protects that place across the water, and here again mountain biking that we have within this vicinity, but it's also making sure we take consideration of those who are taking their first steps, who are adversely affected by the attitudes that we have as an industry. I'm rambling, I've lost my train of thought, but yeah, this is where it starts, this is where the action happens, and as a business we have a responsibility to listen, because you are the experts.
Any questions from the floor?
Thanks, Elle. Thanks everyone for sharing that. It's really awesome to have like these perspectives like being shared with us as a community. Something I'd love to get your views on, it's a slight extension on Harry's point, but within like the change that's happening with businesses, whether that's Trek or Patagonia, and trying to make positive change, but also having that kind of fear of greenwashing and wanting to be held accountable. Like, what would you want from us as a community to support like business to make kind of more meaningful and perhaps more transparent change? So what would you want from us as a kind of collective of people from all sorts of different positions within kind of outdoor area space movement, if you like? Thank you.
Can I take that first? Yeah. I think every business has a responsibility to be authentic, it needs to be transparent, and it needs to be accountable. And that accountability is key here, in that a community needs to feel that they're on a level with a business to be able to communicate back to them that this isn't okay. And quite often businesses will act without malice and not realize where they are doing harm. And it's only by actually businesses turning up and coming to things like this to learn what the issues are on the ground, to actually then have that open dialogue and find solutions. And the reality is that we are part of a much bigger problem. And we say at Patagonia, we don't use the word responsibility, we don't use the word sustainable, because sustainability just isn't a thing. We act responsibly, but we have an impact on the planet. And the apparel industry alone is 10% of global emissions. We have a responsibility to address that footprint and actually start to take consideration of the environmental impact, but also the social impact that goes with that along the way too. So yeah, keep telling us when we do wrong, find a constructive way to do it, call us in, don't call us out.
No, I was just going to say, I mean, I was going to just go down that line anyway, but I'd say just keep on keeping on. You've got to keep doing it. And again, calling us out, it helps loads. I constantly have to justify what I'm doing internally. And to do that, I need you guys to go out there and help me with that. And again, it was funny, sat around the fire last night talking about all the different trail associations. I can't work with 16 individual trail associations. I have to work with one person. And I have to run that like a business as well when I ask for money and funds to help you all. So yeah, the more you can come together and keep on going, the better, and the easier it makes my life. So yeah, that'd be my ask.
I don't have much to add, so ditto, but I will say that the reason why I'm here is because we aim and hope to support more activism like this. We're working on our supply chains, and to be honest, I don't need a lot of people descending upon the warehouses and the DCs to try and, remove plastic. Actually, I think that's something that we're really working hard to wrestle with. So I would say as an individual, show up to these things, because this is activism, and this is where you get the attention of great brands and great organizations. And then when you do go to work, when you get a job or you go out into industry, continue to make those really big changes. So ultimately, just keep showing up, both at work and here. They're noticing it. There's a reason why these organizations are here.
Ooh, thank you. Yeah, great, Manon.
Hi. So I have a question for Scott. Again, you said that maybe we wouldn't know about the work you do because you've kind of been intentional about that, so I'm kind of curious. How have you managed to get so many brands or companies together? Like something that we've talked about in mountain biking is that the activism that we're trying to do, whether it's looking after trails and the places they're in, is something that's like across industry. You need like every company working on it together. So yeah, curious how you get all the companies together. And how do companies find out about what you're doing to also to join in, I suppose?
Yeah, and it's not a secret, by the way. It's just, we're just not trying to be big and shouty about it. You can go to the singleuseplasticsproject.com and you can download a super boring 80-page report on plastics and another document on polybag standards and whatnot. You can see all the great participants, everybody. I mean, I'm looking around just seeing all the brands and logos on all your shirts and stuff. 80% of the organizations and logos that are on your shirts are involved in this. And I would say, how did we do it? That's an easy one to answer. So about 3 or 4 years ago, a couple of organizations realized that this was a problem and they were trying to do something, and they were all doing different things, whether it was water-soluble bags or, you know, stuff made out of like lobster shells or cactuses or sugarcane or something. And they were all kind of doing their own different thing. And they noticed that, and they got in a room and they started talking, and they said, hey, we can't do anything unless we work together on this. And so they approached the European Outdoor Group, which is the organization that I work for. They said, we want to make a project out of this. That's when I was brought on, was to manage the project. And once we already had that 17 organizations all spread across the supply chain saying, like, this is a problem, we don't know what to do about it, they were the ones that came together. I think you'd be really impressed. I know, so I don't originally come from the outdoors industry. I come from tech. I worked for Apple for several years. It was all about secrets and black boxes and whatnot. And it was cool. You guys are cool. It was cool to come into this industry and see how well they work together, and the fact that actually behind the scenes, they're really working hard on a lot of these topics: microplastics, single-use plastics, carbon reduction, joint supply chain action. There's some really cool stuff. Social labor, all that stuff is really embedded in their DNA. So they were already doing that. What we did as a project, though, is we tried to produce really compelling results, really simple research, stuff that's very easy to distill and to understand, very similar to the report that's being released today, to say, here's what the problem is, here's how we're seeing it. And when we were able to start communicating that and present a very sound business case, they just started piling on in a really nice way. So it's great industry. Honestly, they're always pretty embedded in a lot of these things, and I can't take credit for their collective action because they were doing it before me, and they're probably going to be doing it long after me. Just need to stop holding this.
I have a question for Rachel. So, because you have this position where you're intimately involved with two different and quite distinct outdoor communities, how do we? I guess most people in this room here would self-identify as some kind of bike rider, whether that is a mountain biker or whatever label you want to put on it. How good are we as a community at looking outside of ourselves and at looking at the wider outdoor community compared to mountaineering and to climbing? Or are there any other lessons or parallels that you see from being able to look across both camps?
I kind of feel that we're all the same, aren't we? If you're the riders, we're the roamers, maybe, and the runners. But everybody there's like a cross-discipline thing. I think our sport, maybe we use less. We have slightly less equipment. Maybe we have some climbing gear, some ropes, some rack, but that lasts a lot longer. It's got a longer lifespan. I think manufacturers of that kit really look into how long stuff can last and how it's all about how strong it is. And I feel a little bit like the bike industry isn't a focus of the bike industry at all. No one looks at how long a mech will last, or a bottom bracket is a disposable part that will last less than 6 months, and that feels quite shocking. If you come into the bike industry from another sport, that would be my big observation.
You can make a bottom bracket last for longer than 6 months if you epoxy it into your frame. Pro tip.
So we've got one from the live feed from Tom, mostly aimed at Rach again, around outdoor experiences. But it's easier to market a physical product as sustainable or recycled. But what can we do to build into national governing bodies courses to encourage all instructors delivering these experiences to encourage people to be engaged and responsible, particularly if they're new to the environment?
Yeah, it's a bit of background to that. I work on the mountain leader training schemes for mountaineering, but I also work for British Cycling on the mountain bike leaders. And there is nothing in the British cycling syllabus around sustainability or environmental. There's hardly anything about the environment. A rider isn't expected to take someone on a bike ride and tell them about where they are. Whereas in the mountain leader, that's a core element of the syllabus. And if you come away without having imparted any kind of environmental enthusiasm or knowledge, or you can't speak about a topic, then you fail. You're sent home and you have to come back another time. So I definitely think there's a lot of responsibility there towards imparting that knowledge into the next generation or into new people. I don't think that we as mountain bikers put enough emphasis on it yet. So I definitely agree that that could be something we could improve on.
I don't know if it's a question, more of something to add to that. So Jake and I attended something with the what do they call themselves now? It was a sustainability and environmental education in outdoor sport, and it was all about building the environment into guided and leaded qualifications and stuff. Because at the minute, as I'm not a guide or leader, and I've never done anything like that, but it's focused on skills and safety. Whilst they're obviously important and interconnected, fundamentally, without the environment, you wouldn't be able to have the skills or the safety. So that project was all about how do you do that without taking anything away from the skills and safety. So I wonder, like, just from your point of view and anybody else's point of view in the room, how does that become possible? And I think that, like, from our point of view, it's about that holistic shared responsibility, and it's not just the brands. It's the leaders, it's the governing bodies, it's the people that are engaging in it. So if you go and do a mountain leader qualification, or you go and do a mountain bike leader qualification, ask the question, what are we doing? Like, what's our impact getting here? That was a really key thing that kind of rung true for me, is like, okay, we're here doing this great thing, but has anybody thought about what's happened to everything else around us? And I think if you can pull that out to a bigger kind of sphere, then you get that collective responsibility a little bit more. So yeah, sorry, there wasn't really a question in there, but something to add to the
I suppose
I
think if I take 6 people out for the day, that's 6 more people that can tell 6 people and tell 6 people. We talk about brands, but there's also the media. There's the media in this room, and you hardly ever see in a mountain biking magazine, you never see chat about the environment or the place that we're operating in. I don't read loads of magazines, so don't someone put their hand up and go, I wrote about that last week. But I don't think that's an emphasis as much as perhaps the products that we consume or the skills or the technical riding. I don't feel like that's at the forefront of media as much as it could be. Manon really wants to speak. She's like...
Well, I was just I wasn't sure if Joe had a hand. Okay. I had a question. I feel like a lot of what we talk about is like cultural, behavioural change or evolution maybe within mountain biking as a sport. And I feel like it's a really hard thing to measure or to say this is what's changed. And I just wonder if you have what your viewpoint might be or how you might look at seeing what has changed, so through advocacy, and groups like Trash Free Trails, through mountain biking or other sports, if you've had experience in other sports. Yeah, I don't know. How do you think you can kind of track or see what's changing? Because it's kind of like an evolution, right? That's, yeah.
Come on.
It's a really hard one to answer, but I'm thinking back to the conversation we had about the pink bike videos and kind of the phraseology that was used around it, and then the expansion of that into marketing as well. We live in a capitalist society. We have economies that are ultimately fueled by consumption. And if the messaging associated with that consumption does not align with the community it's aimed at, then it won't be successful. So whilst it's not a comfortable metric, I'd say look at the marketing that's used by brands and people who are trying to commercialize your passion. Have a look at the people who are represented in it. Have a look at the language used. Have a look at the imagery. And it's an uncomfortable metric, but that's the reality. And if you look at adverts in print magazines today and compare them to the ones in the early 90s, what's changed? And some people would argue not much. A lot of people would argue a lot. There's many other metrics that I'm sure the rest of the panel will come up with as well.
Yeah, I've got nothing to add to that.
I'll add one thing. I think that if you want to measure something, you've got to track it. And that's there. You can measure so many things. If there's something you're passionate about, I mean, look at Dom. He said, I'm passionate about what's on the trail. Work on it. And then suddenly you'll be sitting down in a room full of people who are really passionate about this. And I do think, I mean, like, I can't tell you all about plastic, but I can tell you that we just sent 6.4 metric tons of poly bags to a recycling facility in Warrington, and I can tell you the grade, I can tell you how much it cost, and I can tell you how much they paid us for it. So if you're passionate about something, if you find something that you want to measure, figure out the baseline, establish that baseline, and that's the work, and then you can show progress with that. And I would argue that sometimes our passion goes so broadly that we forget that we do need to take a moment. We need to say, okay, am I actually creating improvement? A lot of organizations and a lot of benefit and a lot of energy is wasted on things that we just care generally about, and we don't take the time to actually figure out where are we at, where are we going, what do we want out of this?
Hi, this is more of a rhetorical question, I think. I would really love to know how we can make more sustainable products available at more accessible price points. So a lot of product and stuff comes through past my desk, and I'm seeing these amazing premium products that are made with recycled materials or made to be super durable, so have a really long lifespan. But then at the same time, they're like almost always significantly more expensive than, you know, your average, you know, Walmart bike or something you might get from Halfords. And I felt so inspired this morning talking about nature connection and how we can actually get people to give a damn about these wild spaces in the first place so that they do turn to actually care and, you know, pick up trash. But then equally, if there's like an economic issue where they're only able to access stuff that isn't made sustainably, how do we get around that? Can we have sustainable products at affordable price points?
You know, I just want to say one quick thing, then I'm going to pass this down. But I think that we've been lied to about the true cost. And when we see the sticker price at a discount retailer or at a fast fashion, you know, organization, they're giving you the cost that they were able to get for the product based off of the cost of goods and the materials. It's not factoring in a lot of the environmental issues. And when you do factor in a lot of the ESG, the social, the labor, the environment, the fair wages, ultimately we have become used to as a society paying far less than it's actually costing the environment and the world. So we do have to adjust to the fact that this premium product, that's just the cost of a product. And I think that if we're looking for sustainability, we need to look more towards the secondary markets, the use markets, the repair markets, and getting people access points into rental models and access points into secondary markets. And I think that's really where the conversation needs to go, rather than how do we get, a Patagonia jacket, their price down. Although, I mean, I wouldn't be upset if they were to be, cheaper or whatever. But yeah.
Yeah, it's that thing of, I always say, it's that people know the cost of everything, value of nothing sort of thing. It's, it's that disposable bottom bracket. What is the value of that to you and what you're trying to do with it, and how do you get more out of that? I know we're working on end-of-life product stuff, but a big company, that's going to take a number of years to get that sorted out. My other thing as well is just access for people who can't get on a bike. It's a big thing as well. We're working with people like in the inner cities and stuff. It's a real problem. If you live in a tower block and you have kids, where do you get bikes from? How do you store those bikes? How do you get to work on bikes? You know, and these are people who have busy and awkward home lives. They have important jobs. A lot of them are critical care workers and stuff. How do we change or help them? And then it helps the rest of us. It's slow and it's a long slog. And that's why I need all this happening as well. Sorry, Rich.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting point, and I'm further back at what you said, like the true cost of a responsibly made product from a social and environmental perspective is not represented in the marketplace at the moment. And we talk about Patagonia price point, and that comes up so much. And one of the easy responses to that is look at the secondary economies, buy second-hand, buy repaired. And you've also got to be careful that if you are saying to someone who maybe doesn't have the income or accessibility to get that premium product new in the first place, you shouldn't also be saying to them that you're not worth that. You have to buy second-hand. So I think actually what we can all do is normalize that secondary economy and actually be less reliant upon the primary that has the greatest impact in the first place upon our planet, and actually all begin to embrace that secondary repair culture and look to products that are circular. And if they're not there, look to demand that businesses start to look at how they start making bottom brackets that can go back into other bottom brackets, and actually advocate and support businesses that are looking to these solutions. But I think there's so many dimensions to this that we just need to appreciate that we don't live in a true representation of the cost of what we consume.
Yeah, that's pretty much what I was going to say in more complicated terms, I think, Harry. But I think that concept of cheap stuff versus expensive stuff, which is basically what we're talking about here, is related to what I was talking around, well, what we've all been talking about around consumption and consuming of the outdoors and nature. And once we get away from that purchase, consume, dispose mentality, I mean, this is very nebulous now, but if we can ever get out of that cycle, then people might start to appreciate the fact that stuff does cost more, right? And when I say stuff, I mean that in the broadest sense of the term as well. Like, nature isn't cheap. Like, it costs money to get there, it costs money to be there, it costs money to maintain. And I think that once we can understand that, then the concept of cheap might begin to disappear a little bit, because you'll be able to appreciate that, you know, if you want something to last longer, that's just what the cost is, right? And that's the cost of everything, value of nothing thing. So
I think it's worth remembering as well that we don't have to exist passively within these systems. We can communicate back to stakeholders, to businesses, to landowners, to national governing bodies, and actually say we expect more.
Yeah, and you know, as consumers, customers, we're stakeholders as well, right? Just because you're the person that buys the product doesn't mean you have no say in what it does and what it's about. So, yeah, that's important for the community to remember, that we have a stake in it. We are stakeholders.
The first step is flipping consumer to citizen.
Yeah.
Because you don't just consume, you do more than that. You love those trails, you ride, you laugh, you love, you embrace each other, you share that community. Your pure economic value is not just consumption.
Yeah, the difficulty is the recognition of that, and again, it's I think everybody here recognises that, but how are we going to spread that message?
You're already doing it.
Yeah.
I suppose a question I've got for you guys is how can an individual call out, or as Harry said, call in brands if we see something that we don't like, that we think you're doing something negatively, or doing something that's negatively impacting the community and the sport and the landscape that we love so much? I know I really struggle with being able to call people out in a positive manner, and this is one of the things I find absolutely amazing, and I suppose quite selfishly is one of the reasons why I'm part of the Trash Free Trails crew, is because I find it how amazing how positive they approach the whole problem. Because when I see trash, it makes me angry, and to see people turning that into positive action is, yeah, I just hope that it's going to rub off on me one day, I don't know. But basically, like, if somebody's sending you an email saying, we're not happy with how you've done this, how how would you want to read something like that? Like, what would you listen to as a brand to actually take action? Because I know there's kind of a fine line where if somebody's just screaming at you, you're probably just going to go, that is not worth my effort. But if somebody's just being a bit like, oh, please, you may not also listen to that. So where is that fine line where you as a brand will probably listen the most to an individual rather than a collective group?
Yeah, I think the email's the easy one. It's the screaming social media, that is the hard one. And like, we'll naturally just get it because we're a big brand anyway. So you'll just get people hating on you for whatever reason. I'd love a bit of constructive criticism. It's great, actually, just talking to someone. What I tend to do, someone send me an email, the first thing I do on something like that is I find their phone number up and call them. And it's that, it just breaks a boundary. You've got more in common than you have against each other. So there's a common ground there. If you're into bikes, whatever, you can work on it. But it's that constructive criticism, just flipping it around. It's a hard job to do and sort of suck up a lot of pride and stuff. But yeah, anyone who can come to us with constructive advice, we'll act on it for sure. Do you want to
jump on that as well? I completely agree with doing a lot of agree on this panel. It's supposed to be competitive. Yeah, I agree that kind of sitting down with someone and breaking bread is the best way to find a resolution. But to many people, there's an incredibly high barrier to doing that. And it's that distinction between a screaming social media post and an email. And the reality is that you don't know who the right person to email is. You get a generic email address. And I think part of that is a responsibility of the brands who want to have a stake in this community, even if it's from a commercial perspective, actually showing up and being the person who is your point of contact. And I'm Harry. I work for Patagonia. I give a damn about the trails. If you want my email address, let me know. If there's a problem, give me a shout. I'm happy to actually come and break bread with any of you and have those conversations. But not every brand is willing to actually go out there, show up, try and be an active part of the community.
Yeah, I think you guys, again, you're the eyes and the ears, so we need to know about stuff like that as well.
Oh, jeez. I think it's helpful to ask questions rather than make broad declarative statements on social media. They've already addressed all the other stuff, but I just know that having done the social media work, you can tell a big difference when somebody's like, this is bad, versus if they're like, why do I always see your branded bottles on the trail? And in a picture of it, I think that's a much more constructive way to approach a conversation like that.
I guess to fire the question back at you and talk about those three things I had before, which was authenticity, transparency, and accountability, what more do you think, not that you have all the solutions, Sam, but brands could and should be doing to be more accountable?
Should we repeat the question for the live feed? How do we get brands to care about this who aren't already involved and aren't here today?
I'll just say it from the perspective of an industry association. We've got about 120 some odd brands and retailers in our association, and it's very much the 80-20 rule. You've got 20% who lead out, who are on top of things, who are caring, who are passionate, who are sitting in seats at these events. You keep showing up, you keep wearing their kit, you keep buying their stuff, you keep showing that you care, you keep liking their posts, you keep engaging with their posts, you keep resharing their stuff, you keep praising them and writing articles and media and stuff about them. The other 80%, they notice, and they'll take it issue by issue, and they'll say, wow, there's a lot of concern about the state of our trails here. We need to be involved in that. So some of them will come for the right reasons, some of them will come for the wrong reasons, but if we do it right, we can get all of them to come eventually.
I just want to know what step you put to progress on your purposeful adventurer. So, like, what was your one takeaway from this weekend that you're going to progress and move forward with?
Again, for me, it's that diversity of the community. I've got to bring communities together. That's what I want to do as a marketing manager anyway. It's something that's really hard as a big brand anyway. So the more I can engage with local communities and help them in a proper way, the better. I mean, that's my personal take. It always has been. And it only takes one person with inside a company to change that. If it's a good company, people will act on that. So yeah, that's mine.
I just feel like I can go away with and maintain my faith, and that I know that I'm not alone in how I feel about spending time in the outdoors.
Yeah, there's a lot that's been processed over the last few days, and so many threads and so many conversations. And I think for me, it's a case of going back, actually sitting down and reflecting. I'm very fortunate that I have a job role where we are offered opportunities to experiment and innovate and use a toolkit that we have to actually have impact without pushing the brand front and center. And I think what I need to sit down is really process the conversations I've had with different people and work out how we can best support in a meaningful way that isn't about putting the brand first, but is ultimately more aligned with actually maintaining and nourishing a community rather than being extractive and diminishing it.
Oh, I thought I got off. One of the words going off of yours, he was in my group that we attached to diversify, and diversity was focus. And I think that I see there's a lot of things that can draw our attention away, and I'm seeing a lot of really great opportunities here, and I want to focus in on a couple of them, see if I can help augment them so that in a few years' time, if we're meeting up together, and if you all happen to remember me, that hopefully I'd be able to say that I contributed towards a 1 or 2% lift or 50% lift on some of those variables that I've chosen.
I guess we sometimes feel that adventures have to be big, and we have to be in the mountains to do that. But there's a couple of things. So in terms of the travel, so for us, particularly traveling with bikes, we feel like we have to drive somewhere to have that experience. And it was interesting that Glenn's real first comment today was that we had to fly. And it was a bit of a shocker. So, local adventures and having that sort of nature connection, and a bit what like Emma said about the micro adventures and things like that, that's actually really important. So how can we actually encourage people to do that? Because actually then you need less specialist equipment, and actually there's that opportunity to find out more about where you live. So, how can we encourage that type of thing?
Yeah. I always say to people, think big, start small, but definitely start. And I think there's that whole, people are frightened because they don't have the right bike and they don't have the Lycra and they can't ride 100K, and all the people they follow on Instagram rode 100K at the weekend. So I think we have to be better at peddling this message of, why don't you just go round the park in your jeans on the bicycle that you've got? Because the most sustainable bike is the bike that you already own, isn't it? And the best bike is the bike that you already own. So I just think we need to, be a little bit better at sharing that message, because it's cool to be inspired by someone's epic journey, but it's hard to start that epic journey. And so I suppose that's where it's good at, mountain bike leaders are really good at, because a lot of the people that I train don't go on to be professional guides guiding people on Santa Cruzes. They tend to be going back to schools or scout clubs or community organizations where they're just taking people around the park. And that is what we are good at, is educating those people. And there's a stepping stone leadership model to allow people to take you on your first adventure around the park or down the canal.
I think as brands as well, we have a responsibility to advocate for the backyard. And I think that's been more prevalent for everybody. Again, it's that micro-adventure conversation that has been more prevalent on the back of lockdown. But Patagonia is a California brand. It has been historically so easy for us to put pictures of the Rockies and the Sierra Nevadas and everything else. And the reality is that we have to change that, and we are changing that. And one of my passion projects within Patagonia is actually make sure we've got local content on the UK channels to actually show people that here's a blog post from an ambassador who's gone sea cliff climbing in the Shetlands. Here's Manon advocating for trails in our own backyard, and actually start to have that representation that you don't have to fly to this fantastic resort in order to have that adventure. And if you create aspirational product, the aspirational adventure doesn't have to be beyond the reach as well. Not sure what else to add to that.
Go on, I'll let Rich finish off.
Yeah, I'm just sort of curious around the way kind of brands market things, and you see brands marketing things very differently, but the language that's used. So in mountain biking, you see quite a bit of kind of shredding the trails and ripping them up and that kind of language. And yeah, just curious on your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think I mean, speaking from Trek's point of view, we've actually become very sort of boring in terms of that those advert words, and that's on purpose. And again, I do a lot of UK content creation as well. I have to move away from that US look of doing things and create a different look for the UK audience. And that now is just changing everyone who's actually on the bikes, the demographic of people using the bikes. And again, just like I've got this big thing, I live in a city, so I come into these hills. I grew up in the countryside, I grew up in the lakes and everything, but I actually really enjoy city living. And my thing is like, how do I make that city I live in like the lakes? There's loads of adventures you can have off your back door. And going back to what Joe was saying, just do something is the message now that we're sort of more going down. I remember in the past we were very performance driven as an advertising look, and that went like 10 years ago. We've just moved away from that. You'll still see a little bit of the nah stuff that is going on, but yeah, it's changing a lot.
Yeah, it's a valid point, and it's that pink bike videos conversation again that they did at IMBA, where they kind of looked at the titles and videos and kind of there with that aggressive language. And what would you retitle this video as to make it more accessible, to see that it isn't destructive? And at Patagonia, again, a key founding principle for us is the preservation of our playgrounds and the protection of our playgrounds. And that's reflected across the board. We're not going to use we're not going to use shredding. We're not going to talk about tearing things up. But instead lean more into the shared experience, the community, not to spiel off marketing slogans, but one of the recent ones was sweat equity, and actually embracing, to me, the worst bit of mountain biking, which is sweating your ass off to actually get up there, and celebrating those moments. But there's definitely a responsibility upon brands, if they are going to start advocating that they're sustainable, that they also take consideration of how their product is used and whom by, and then with what intention, not just how it was made in the first place.
Which is why we're wearing the same trousers.
Exactly. Thankfully, we're not sharing them, but...
Thanks, everyone. I think that's a really great place to end the panel session. I'm aware that after all the coffee at lunchtime, people might need a short comfort break. But thank you so much to our awesome panelists, and thank you to all the amazing questions from the floor. Yeah, it's really cool to know that like we all have that shared common ground and common purpose, like regardless of whether we're working in-house at a brand or we're training the instructors and the ride leaders of tomorrow, or we're a member of that outdoor community, that we all have that shared drive of that value of wanting to protect and leave a positive trace on our outdoor playground. Yeah, amazing. So we'll take a very short comfort break, and then we will be back for the culmination of today, where everything will all start to make sense. We promise.